what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the commodities title, pretty much the first part of the commodities title. Who here has base on a farm? Has crop base? I see a few hands. Okay. I asked that question because that's mainly the main question, and if you notice on the agenda, you got some acronyms on there. We've already gone through some acronyms on the conservation title. Well, we got new acronyms to learn on this farm bill related to the commodities, and so we could just be talking about acronyms this morning. But as the old saying goes, the brain can only absorb how much your rear end can endure. So I'm going to hit it kind of quick. There's 12 titles in this farm bill that took, what, 2.5 years, 3 years, John, to finally get passed. And the commodities title's always been, I guess, the most important as far as when we talk about a farm bill. It used to be the commodities title actually had individual crop titles by the crop, but all the crops, commodities fall under there. Then Amanda just talked about the conservation title, the second title. The fourth title is nutrition. You got trade and nutrition. Well, nutrition is really, I guess, is what we can say held up the farm bill for so long. And the reason being is it's the largest part of the spending. It's where the major amount of money is spent now in the farm bill. And like I said, we could be covering a lot of other things. 7 is where we are covered as far as some of our funding with UGA and Extension and research. But a lot of the money that was in the commodities title, that first title, some of it has been shifted down to Title 11, crop insurance. And this farm bill is really built around risk management. And so the new programs under the commodities title really are probably more designed to complement or to work in conjunction with crop insurance or crop insurance-like programs. And so it's a lot more flexibility in this farm bill, I think, as we'll learn or as we go, but it also makes it more complex because of the flexibility. And then Dr. Lacey will cover some of the livestock disaster provisions that's in the miscellaneous title. So almost 80% of the funding comes out of the nutrition title, food stamps, and so forth, followed by crop insurance and then conservation. So the commodities title actually is number 4 down on that line now as far as spending. So where does that spending happen? It's in those programs, the covered commodity programs as far as Title 1. And those of you with base, you probably know what DCP means. You heard of ACRE when the last farm bill was passed, but nobody signed up for ACRE in Georgia, so we won't worry about it. SURE was the disaster payment program for crops, which is not reauthorized, actually ended in 2011 crop. But there's a new programs that replace the old DCP. We don't have any more direct payments or counter-cyclical payments. Those were eliminated with the new farm bill. But a new counter-cyclical light program called PLC, Price Loss Coverage, is established. And there's also a new revenue program called ARC, Agricultural Risk Coverage. Those two programs, producers will have a choice of which one to sign up for. And you can do that on a crop-by-crop, farm-by-farm basis. It's a one-time election. So you make your election, and then that whichever one that you choose, you're under that contract for the life of the farm bill. And so within ARC, Agricultural Risk Coverage, there's actually 2 types of ARC. There's county-based and individual-based ARC. And we'll talk just a little bit about that this morning. But when you want to boil it all down to what do you as a producer or a landowner need to do under this farm bill? What are the decisions? The 3 main ones are one, a base decision. This farm bill allows you to update your base acres on a farm. It allows you to either retain your current base as it was on September 30, 2013, or to reallocate according to a 4-year history. But it doesn't allow you to build base. So if you got 100 acres of base on your farm, you can't increase that 100 acres to 120 or whatever. It stays at 100. So you can't reallocate a farm more than what your current base level is. You can change or change what base that is, whether it's peanuts, corn, wheat, soybeans. The second thing the Farm Bill allows you to do is update payment yields. And so the base on a farm has a yield, a payment yield tied to it, what they call a DCP yield under the 08 Farm Bill, where you're going to have a payment yield now for the PLC program. And you can choose to retain the old DCP payment yield, or you can update it to a 5-year history on this Farm Bill. And then, which program do you want to participate in? The PLC, the ARC county, or the ARC individual? And so those are the three main decisions. The first two are really it says a farmer, but the producer is defined as basically the landowner, or those that have interest in the farm. And then, so number 1, number 2 is a landowner decision. Number 3 is a producer election on the farm. So the first decision, what do you do with base? Do you retain or reallocate? Didn't mention it, but in Title I, cotton is not in the commodities title anymore, other than the marketing loan. Its program is down in the crop insurance, Title 11. And so there's cotton's not eligible for PLC or ARC. But we have cotton base in the old Farm Bill. What do you do with that cotton base? That cotton base becomes generic base. It's now called generic base. We'll just say, all right, I've got cotton base, it's generic base. It's time for me to make a decision to update, to either retain or reallocate. Well, that generic base, we're going to set it off to the side because you can't do anything with it during this updating process. It's generic base, and it's kind of put into a safe deposit box for a little while. The other crop bases, the covered commodities, you can retain it as of September 30, 2013. What your current base is right now, you can just keep it the same, make that election. Or you can reallocate, not including generic base, but the other bases. You can reallocate according to a 4-year history from 2009 to 2012. So the average acres planted and prevented planted on a farm in covered commodities, you can reallocate it to that history, not to exceed your total base acres, what your total base acres were or are. Any questions there? Well, we don't want to do questions yet. I'm used to handling questions. Let's do a quick example. 200-acre farm, of which you've got 180 acres base. Why didn't I say 200 acres of base? Well, just to make the point that you can't build base. You got 20 acres there that you don't have base on, and you can't add those 20 acres. All right. So let's say we got 100 acres of cotton. That cotton base is now generic base. So out of the 180, we got 100 acres of cotton. We got 50 acres of peanuts. We got 20 acres of corn and 10 acres of wheat. So how many acres of base can we reallocate? 80. We got 80 acres of crop base now that can be reallocated or retained. So from 2009 to 2012, let's say on this farm they planted peanuts and corn, and they planted them by about 65 acres of peanuts and 65 acres of corn. I didn't put cotton up there, although this farm probably planted cotton because it doesn't, you can't update cotton. So you got 65 acres of peanuts, 65 acres of corn over that time period that it averaged, that's actually 130 acres of base, or planted acres, I should say, and that's more than you actually have base. So you can't build it. You can only allocate the 80 acres. And so how am I going to be allowed to allocate this planting history? Well, it says if you have more acres of covered commodities planted on the history, you have to allocate it by proportion that it was planted. So in this case, it was planted in a 50-50 proportion, 50% peanuts, 50% corn. So the new allocation, if you chose to reallocate, it would be 40 peanut base acres and 40 corn. You'd basically add 20 acres of corn and reduce your peanut base acres by 10, and basically drop your wheat in that example. All right. And then you're still at 80 acres total crop basis. So that's kind of one example. Everybody's going to be different on their bases and how they're set up. And we'll be glad to take questions a little later on specific examples, folks' examples. Again, this is a landowner decision, and all people who have interest in it have to sign off on the reallocation to update or retain. So again, let's talk real quickly about generic base. What is it? It's the old cotton base, and it doesn't change for the life of the Farm Bill. So you've got cotton base that becomes generic base, and while you can't reallocate or do anything with it, it does allow you from a year-to-year or annual basis to temporarily assign or allocate a base of a covered commodity to it. And so, basically, the generic base, with cotton not being in the Title I program but being down in crop insurance, what was cotton base worth without a program? Doesn't have any value. So this generic base allows the old cotton base to still have value, and you can temporarily assign a covered commodity, except for cotton, that's planted on the farm to that generic base. Now, you may ask us, well, how do I have to plant it on that tract that has the generic base, or do I just have to plant it on the farm? We don't know those details yet. That comes out in the rules and regs. But this is the language, at least, says that you can plant a covered commodity planted can be temporarily allocated to a generic base. So it has to be planted in this case to be eligible. The other crop bases, the 80s that we just went through example, there's no planting requirement. It's still decoupled like the old program. So you get paid on that base whether you plant the crop or not. But on the generic base, it says it has to be planted. And here's the language related to it, where base acres are defined with respect to a covered commodity. It means the number of acres in effect on September 30, 2013, or reallocated like that example we went through. And like I said, those acres are decoupled, but then the total base acres, payment base acres, includes the generic base. And that's the language that says planted to a covered commodity in the Farm Bill. So if we use that previous example and we assume that you plant like your history has been, you go ahead and plant 65 acres of peanuts again and 65 acres of corn and the remaining 70 in cotton, that gives you total 200 planted acres. The covered commodities, again, is 130 acres. It's more than your generic base. You've got 100 acres of generic base. And so how do you allocate that temporarily for 2014? You would have to do it, again, by proportion because your total covered commodity planted acres exceeds the generic base. And so it'd be on a 50-50 basis. 50 temporary peanut acres and 50 temporary corn acres on the farm, or on the generic base. So to give you your 100 generic base acres. So you got 100 generic base acres, and according to we planted 50. So if you chose to retain the old bases on the farm, you take that 50 of the crop base plus the 50 generic, you get 100 peanut base acres. And then you took the 20 of your corn crop and 50 of the generic, you got 70 corn base acres, and then you still have the 10 wheat base acres. And so that total of 180 acres would be eligible for whichever program you signed up for under each crop on the farm. Getting a little complicated? Because that peanuts could be signed up under PLC, the corn could be ARC County, and the wheat could be PLC or ARC County. So there's a lot of moving parts in this farm bill. If the farm is reallocated, then you take the 40 of the crop reallocated acres plus the 50 generic and of each of peanut and then corn, and get 90 peanut, 90 corn. And so, when it comes time to actually start making these decisions and doing the sign up, these are the scenarios that we'll be working with all, hopefully through the county agents with some type of decision aid program to look at these decisions. On payment yields, this is for the PLC program. Again, it's on the crop by crop basis, and it's at the discretion of the landowner, so you can either retain or update the payment yields. If you update, it's at 90% of the average for the 5-year average, 08 through 2012, 2008 through 2012. So it's 5 years instead of 4 on the yields. The thing about updating yields is who has the yield records? The farmer, the producer. And so even though it's a landowner decision, there's going to have to be some cooperation between the landowner and the farmer in order to prove yields, whether those records are kept by the producer, or you have some loan records, or you have crop insurance records. We don't know exactly how FSA is going, what they're going to say to use to prove yields yet. That'll come out in the rules and regs also. But if there's multiple owners, all owners have to agree and sign to update yields. If there are yields where a crop was not planted, do you count that year? Do you put a 0 in the average? No, you drop that year. So if you only planted corn 3 years of that 5, then you use those 3 years average, not the 5-year. Same thing with peanuts. If you just plant, I think that's why they went to 5. I don't know. I hadn't asked this question, but since peanuts, you get 2 years probably in a 5-year history. And if any year the crop yield is less than 75% of the 5-year county average, you can use that. So if you got a real bad year, there is a bottom that they'll put in there, a cup as far as how low the yield you can plug in. And then finally, whether to choose PLC, price loss coverage. Again, this is like the old target price. The countercyclical program is what PLC is. And you can choose that on a crop by crop, farm by farm basis. So what are the covered crops? Peanuts, corn, wheat, other small grains, oilseeds, soybeans. Those are your commodities. ARC is the revenue program, like I mentioned earlier. It's on a crop by crop, farm by farm basis. And then ARC individual is all crops on the farm. So if you choose ARC individual, you actually have to enroll all crops on the farm, not just corn, if you want to go ARC individual. So that's a little different. I think for a couple of reasons, ARC individual is probably not going to be very popular in the South or Georgia in particular. It was really put in there for Montana, and the senator from Montana got that included. So PLC, I think we've mentioned that enough. It's like a countercyclical program, and so you've got the old target prices off the countercyclical program there in the left-hand column under the 08 Farm Bill, and like corn was $2.63 a bushel, and peanuts $4.95, soybeans $6, and wheat $4.17. But the effective price, in other words, the trigger price under the old Farm Bill, was actually lower than that. You subtracted off the direct payment on those prices, and so it was actually $2.35 was where the price needed average for it, that you had to fall below that to trigger a payment. So $4.59 on peanuts, $5.56 on soybeans, $3.65 on wheat. So the new trigger is actually the reference price, the PLC reference price. So for corn, it's $3.70 a bushel, grain sorghum $3.95, peanuts $5.35, oats $2.40, soybeans $8.40, and wheat $5.50. And so you've got higher prices for the triggers under the PLC program. And payments will be made on 85% of base. So if it triggers, it won't trigger for all the base, it'll be 85% of the base. And here's a quick example. Basically, the rate, the PLC rate is the difference between the reference price and the national average season price, or the loan rate, whichever one's higher. And you multiply that times the payment yield times the base acres times 85%. And so, you don't have to remember that formula, but that's just showing you how it works. The main thing is the average season price. If it falls below the reference price, it's going to trigger a payment. And then the payment's going to be dependent on what your payment yield is on your farm and how many base acres you have. And so in this case, let's say it averages $500 a ton for the season average price of peanuts. And I got a peanut example up here because peanuts is basically the one, if you looked at those prices, where are market prices right now? Well, peanuts is most likely one to trigger. You got a payment yield of 3,800 pounds or 1.9 tons, and let's say you got 400 acres of peanut base, then it'd be $35 a ton rate, subtracting 500 from 535 times 1.9 tons times 400 acres times 85%. That'd be $22,610 payment over that 400 acres, or $56 roughly an acre. Now the kicker is this payment would come on October 1 or later of 2015, not 2014, a year later. Why is that? Because it's an average season price, and the marketing season goes through the summer of 2015. And so you won't know the final average season price until a year after you harvested the crop. I need to update this probably, but in the last month, but the last NASS report monthly price or weekly price was at $500 a ton. And so the season average price for 2013 right now for peanuts it's probably around $5.10, $5.13, somewhere in that range. So it would trigger a payment, and that's why I use that example. Is what if this was in effect for 2013? And you can see where the average season price has been for peanuts going back to 2008. And so for 2014, the marketing year doesn't start until August 1 of 2014, after the crop, well, right before the crop is harvested. I apologize if I look like I'm concentrating on peanuts, but peanuts is the big issue right now for the 2014. And one of the reasons is that 535 looks real attractive when folks first look at the PLC program, and we're not going to be able to sign up, as Don said, till later, summer or fall. So there was confusion that the 535 was the loan rate. No, it's a reference price. And you're paid on 85% if it triggers. And depending on your farm's history and where your yields fell in on the farm, but chances are your payment yield is going to be less than what your actual yield is because you're using a 5-year average. And then the last couple of years, yields have really, well, with the Georgia 06G, most folks' payment yield is going to be below what their expected yield is when it comes down to it. And then the national season average price on peanuts, it's a weighted average of all types. So it's not just a runner peanut, which you know, we're all runners in Georgia, but it includes Virginias, Valencias, and Spanish. And so there's going to be, what's that going to do to the overall price if you include Virginias and Valencias and maybe even Spanish? It's going to raise the price a little bit. So that national season average price is going to be a little higher than what the Georgia price is going to be, or what we receive in Georgia. So that's going to be what we might want to call a positive basis, or actually our price is going to be a negative basis, you know, what we receive compared to the national season average price. So that's going to probably bring it down a little bit from 535 too. And then if you plant more peanut acres than you have base acres, you're going to lower that average price too. And again, until payments aren't going to be received, so if you're relying on that price or those payments to pay off some expenses, that means you're going to be carrying interest for a longer period of time. It's not like the loan where you can go ahead and get the advance up front. It'll be received later. So, quick example. Let's say the state of Georgia is a farm, and if I looked at let's say we're going to update the payment yield on Georgia for the 2008 to 2012 period. 90% average of that state yield is 3,365 pounds per acre. So I've got a 3,365 payment yield on Georgia. Last 2 years, the average yield in Georgia has been 4,500 pounds. And I would not have a problem saying I'm at least 2 tons, better than 2 tons. I would expect Georgia to, from now on, to average at least 2 tons. But even if at 4,500, that's 1,100 pounds, 1,140 pound difference between the payment yield and what your actual yield's going to be. If we overdo it and plant wall-to-wall peanuts in Georgia, what's going to do to the price? We're going to shoot it down to $3.55 a ton, the loan rate, or below. And that would trigger a maximum payment of $180 a ton. And so on 85%, let's just say we're 1 acre here. We're looking at 1 base acre. That's 85% times $180, $150 per ton payment per base acre. And so multiply that times the payment yield, that'd be $257 per base acre. If prices are in the tank because of that, then maybe you'll get $355, maybe if you pay for storage and other costs, it may be a little lower than that. But let's just assume $355 times what the actual yield. Let's say we did yield the expected yield of 4,505 pounds. That'd be about $800 an acre, and so the total would be about $1,057 an acre, or about $469 per ton. And so the 535 doesn't mean you're going to get 535 necessarily. I think it's going to add $20, $30 a ton to what you receive, but we'll have to see how the program really works. Real quick on ARC, again, it's a one-time election, just like PLC. Can choose between county and individual, and again, the individual requires you to enroll all crops on the farm, whereas ARC County is just crop by crop on the farm. And I know that's a real busy graph, and that's the formula Don put together a lot of these slides for the first meeting that was done, but basically it's a county revenue, benchmark revenue, a guarantee based on that county benchmark revenue, and if the actual county revenue falls below that guarantee, it triggers a payment under ARC. So ARC County is a benchmark county revenue, the 5-year Olympic average, a yield, county yield, and the season average price. That's your benchmark. 86% is the guarantee. So you get an ARC guarantee of 86% of the benchmark county revenue. If the actual county yield and the average season price, that revenue falls below it, it triggers a payment. And that payment's on 85% again, like PLC of the base acres. And also it isn't paid until October 1 or later because it's using the same price, that average season price. And it's also capped at 10% of the benchmark revenue. And so, this may be something we would look more at corn, maybe soybeans, in terms of which program might want to enroll in. For the individual, it's the same, except you got a lower payment rate of 65% instead of 85%. Well, why 65% on individual and not 85% like county? Well, individual yields are more variable than county. County is, when you aggregate all the yields, it smooths it out so it doesn't fluctuate as much. And B, it's a cost thing. There's just not enough money, I think, to go that high on individual. And it's kind of like insurance. I mean, that's really very similar to what Don's going to talk about SEO when you look at what these programs are. And so if you actually choose ACR or ARC, you can't enroll in SEO, another acronym. The new crop insurance program, you can only enroll it if you choose the PLC program. So, not to confuse you anymore. So in calculating the benchmark revenue, if the market year average price is less than the reference price will be used. So you can plug, there's a cup on the price too, and that's the reference price. There's a cup on the yield, 70% of the T yield. If the county falls below that, you just use the 70% of the T yield. That goes back, a T yield is what they use to determine county level yields for insurance. If you don't have any yield history, they'll give you a T yield for that county. That's called the transition yield. As the PLC payment yield, the farm, in ARC individual, you'll have to prove yields, just like you do on PLC, yield updating. And again, there's that October 1 deadline, or payment date or later. Adjusted gross income, basically, to be eligible, you have to have an adjusted gross income of $900,000 per person or entity over a 3-year average period. So if you exceed that, then you're not eligible for the program or the payments that year. Actively engaged, we have a definition in the previous Farm Bill. That definition is being updated, or Secretary of Agriculture is charged with updating that to include a significant contribution of active personnel management. He mentioned in, I guess, his first comments at the Commodity Classic that it would be the end of 2015 before that definition would come out. So basically, the way I interpret that, we'll operate under the same definition in 2014 and 2015. And on the individual level, or entity and person level, the payment limit for these programs is combined. Under the old Farm Bill, you had a payment limit on direct payments, and you had a different payment limit on countercyclical payments. They're combined, so all PLC, ARC, and marketing loan gains and LDPs are under one payment limit, and it's $125,000 per farm or per person, legal entity. If cotton, or I'm assuming cotton falls in there because it's a marketing loan gain, it still has a marketing loan program. But if peanuts are forfeited in the loan, it doesn't actually count against you, your payment limit. But if you do have a marketing loan gain, which week before last, they lowered the national posted price on peanuts below the loan rate. So if peanuts were redeemed that week, they had a marketing loan gain. That gets counted towards the payment limit. The spousal rule does allow you to double that. And then you have equal and separate payment limits on peanuts. So you got a payment limit for corn, soybeans, wheat, small grains, oilseeds, all under that one payment limit, and then you have the equal one for peanuts. So I covered quite a bit there in a short amount of time, and hopefully that helped answer some questions.